Hey everyone, my name is Adriana. Welcome to my channel where I talk about mental health and random life experiences. Today I'm going to be telling you guys all about my bipolar diagnosis. I was diagnosed with bipolar about 5 years ago, and at the time my life was undeniably in just pure chaos. If you've seen one of my other videos called My Best Friend Dumped Me, my diagnosis happened around the same time. And I guess I'll try to just paint a picture for you guys. 5 years ago, I was living in Staten Island. I had my first apartment by myself, and that level of independence was definitely exhilarating. At the time, I was working in downtown Manhattan. I was working on Wall Street at a financial company, and I never ever thought I'd end up in finance. That whole situation was kind of, funny. But so if you're familiar with New York, Staten Island has its own ferry, and that ferry goes across the water to lower downtown Manhattan. And basically, I lived really close to the ferry. I lived 10 minutes away. I would just take a walk every day, take the ferry. The ferry would take about 30 minutes, it would get me to lower downtown Manhattan, and then I would walk 10 minutes to work. It was really convenient, and so I made the move to Staten Island because of that sort of accessibility. But there was another reason why I moved out of my parents' house, and that was honestly to hide a drug addiction from them. I didn't really realize how out of hand it was getting, and it's still something that's really difficult to talk about. I've spoken to very close friends about it, and they're aware of my struggles with that stuff, and but it's still a very nerve-wracking thing to talk about. I sometimes think about the people that may watch these videos, and and maybe it's going to be a family member or a potential client, and I worry, how will someone judge me for these types of experiences that I have endured. And it is, for that reason, really hard to talk about. Yeah, there's judgment around it. I've definitely judged people who are drug addicts, and never thought I'd become one myself. And even though I feel really, I think more than anything, I feel relieved. Even though I feel relieved that that is very much behind me, I still feel a lot of shame around that time in my life. I would say that if the drugs did anything for me, is that they exaggerated an already existing condition, and the only positive it did, I feel, is just point that out. And during that time, when I say everything was in chaos, that's very much true. My job, even though it was liberating to be employed and to be living on my own, I was working in an environment that just wasn't healthy. There were drugs at my job, just circling the place constantly. People would roll blunts on their desks, and it just wasn't really a great place to be. It wasn't going to be a place where you're going to grow and, expand as a person. It's going to be the kind of place that will just bring you down and destroy you and just tear you to pieces. But because of that environment, it was very encouraging of drug use, and I wasn't alone in my habits. But I would say after about a good year of just recreational drug use, it exaggerated my already existing symptoms so much that I finally began to really realize that there was some kind of issue present, some underlying issue that explains so much of my life and my childhood, and addressing that was really hard. It was really fucking hard, honestly. It was just probably one of the most difficult things that I did. Scheduling a doctor's visit is not a difficult thing. It's a relatively simple thing to do. You could even do it online with the click of a button, and 2 minutes, taken away from your life is not much. The convenience is unbelievable when it comes to health these days and finding the appropriate care. At least in the States, that is the case. But it was a big step for me to actually kind of sit there and think to myself, like, wait, something is not quite right here. So I went on this great website, which I think you should all check out. It's called ZocDoc. And thank goodness gracious, I was on my father's insurance at the time. At the time, I believe I was still 26. And he had Aetna, and Aetna was like one of the best insurance that you could have. And I found this doctor who turned out to be like a super high-end doctor. I didn't know that going in to see him. I wasn't like looking for like the person with like the fanciest office or the fanciest reputation. I knew he had a lot of positive reviews, and he sounded like the kind of person that would help me, and he did. But yeah, so going into that office, you know, he was very professional, and, you know, he closed the door, and I think we must have sat together for like a straight hour, just talking and being able to, you know, be with someone in a room that can give you that kind of attention and compassion, like in and of itself, was a really wonderful thing. And I felt it was a really great thing that enabled me to open up and to come to terms with my situation. And, you know, I went over some of the things that I was going through with him. I wasn't shy to talk about the drug use. I felt that it was important. You know, I thought it was really worth noting. And I was very transparent with him. You know, we discussed my childhood and things I've seen in certain family members. And I just told him how, like, you know, when I was young, I remember always being such a victim to my emotions, and that either I would be so like ecstatic and full of energy and life that people would think I was on drugs before I even tried drugs, or I'd be so miserable and so upset that like I could cry honestly for like hours at a time. And I told him that those highs and lows, you know, they really paralyzed me, and it made it difficult, you know, to do well in school, and it made it difficult for my parents to have much faith in me. I think as just a child, a teenager, and even a student, you know, like they constantly worried about me and my well-being, you know, where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. You know, I think they even like doubted that I was going to graduate from college. And it sucks. It really sucked growing up with that kind of doubt. And it wasn't something that they hid very well. I don't think they tried. No, they didn't try. It's very difficult growing up with something like that, kind of like hovering above you. It's like as if I didn't have my own challenges, you know, to see people so close to me that are supposed to be rooting for me that are constantly like concerned and worried and anxious. You know, it really didn't help me at all. But so I spoke with my doctor, and I told him all these different things, and I told him that, you know, as my drug use has progressed, that I noticed that a lot of these symptoms, these extreme moods, that they just progressively were getting worse, you know. I told him how the anxiety would just skyrocket at times, and you know, I was at a place in my drug use where I wasn't even really enjoying getting high anymore. At that point, it was something that I did because I enjoyed the ritual. I didn't really enjoy the way that the drugs made me feel. It was something that I just felt I had to maintain because I was addicted. Because that's what drugs do, at least hard drugs. You know, like I used to do cocaine. That was my drug of choice. But yeah, so it was a really shitty time in my life. And you know, as I sat there with him, he did express his thoughts, and he said that a lot of the different things that I described to him, that it did sound very much consistent with bipolar. And his biggest concern for me was that while it's good that we have some kind of diagnosis and some kind of understanding of what's going on with me, that if he is to prescribe any kind of medication, that like I need to completely discontinue like all drug use. And I didn't hesitate to agree with him, because I did feel that there was no way I was gonna get better if I keep feeding this fire. It's only gonna lead to more destruction, not any kind of healing. So if it wasn't for my drug use, I don't think I would have known that there was like an underlying mental health condition. But obviously if I could go back, I wish I could take it back, but I can't. Yeah. As you can see, this is a really difficult thing to talk about, and even though I feel sharing these types of experiences is really important, it doesn't change the fact that it's difficult. I've thought to myself many times how to prepare for making this kind of video. Usually I'll think about the video I'm gonna make, I'll usually like almost never write a script. I may write like some guidelines, but I feel like this experience, I hate to call it like a highlight in my life, but I guess in a way it is a highlight. It's one of those things that really stands out, and it's one of those things that really dictated the new direction of my life, and my overall just self-awareness. Yeah. To say I'm nervous talking about this is a really big understatement. How do I feel about my bipolar diagnosis? I would have to say I felt a lot of relief. I felt like I finally understood why my life has been the way it's been. I felt like there was finally some kind of explanation for why things have always been just so unbelievably difficult. I mean, it's easy to just sit there and think that you've been dealt the wrong hand, and for some people that is very much the case. But having some kind of knowledge that I knew would help me to improve my situation was a remarkable thing to stumble upon. And even though when I think back to that time, it does kind of just make me want to sit there and weep, I know I can't change the past, and I'm glad that at least one good thing came out of those uncontrollable years of my life. Since my bipolar diagnosis 5 years ago, I have been medicated, and I do feel that the medication has helped me tremendously. I remember when I first started the medication that I was prescribed, that it helped me to just get out of bed in the morning. Before when I was working at that job in the city, I just remember like I'd wake up and it would just be so hard to get myself to just go. Like I had lost kind of all desire at that point to even like engage in normal life. I think my mind was already just worn out, and I think the drugs obviously didn't help in that sense. Like I think it obviously really contributed to the highs and the lows. But one of the things the medication did was like it helped me to just get out of bed. It helped me to just get moving and to kind of feel like I had something to live for again. The drug use got so bad that I just felt really hopeless. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sorts of negative influences around me. There were all sor you know, people that were trying to drive me to do more drugs, and I was in a really toxic relationship, you know, but thankfully, you know, as a result of seeing that doctor and as a result of being medicated, I got some of my strength back, and I had the courage to walk away from this like awful job, you know, where just drugs were floating like everywhere. I got the courage to leave a really toxic relationship. I was dating someone that I genuinely was afraid of, and I'm convinced that had I stayed, that it would have become like physically abusive. It's amazing the things that can happen when you are at your weakest, and it's heartbreaking. Yeah, it's fucking heartbreaking, you know, where your life can go and how you can end up. And I think that I was definitely trying to kill myself slowly with the drugs. I think that had I had enough money to just buy like in bulk, I think I would have definitely overdosed. I felt like, you know, it was only a matter of time, you know, but what drives a person to that point? You know, there's only one thing, and that thing is typically like desperation, lack of interest. I just didn't care anymore. I just felt like I had nothing to live for, and I felt like I was just a lost cause. And obviously everyone's diagnosis story will be different, but for me, it wasn't just like, oh, I've been feeling kind of down lately, let me go see the doctor. For me, it was like everything in my life was just falling apart around me, and it was just really fucking hard. And holy shit, thank God I went to go see a doctor. Thank God I went to get some help, because I know I know for a fact that if I didn't get the help, that I would definitely have I know I would have been gone, man. I know I would have died. I know I would have killed myself in some fucking form or fashion. Like, I have no doubt that I wouldn't exist today if it wasn't for that diagnosis, if it wasn't for the medication. It sucks, man. It sucks, the roads we choose at times, and the kind of life that can be a result of it. And now I'm thinking to myself how, like, my sister-in-law once told me how, like, I just don't get people who just, like, weep on camera on YouTube. You know, I've filmed this video once before, and even though I had these moments of, like, looking away and kind of feeling sad, I never actually, like, cried. But it is, you know, talking about this can be difficult, because when you realize, like, the gravity of the situation, it is fucking sad, you know. And I try really hard not to pity myself, because I feel like, you know, the most difficult things are past me now. But when I have to look back and think back to that time, like, yeah, it is emotionally taxing. It's partly traumatic. It is, you know, just, it's a lot. It's a lot. So I guess now that I've cried for the first time on camera, I guess I could say I've probably overcome a really big fear of mine. But that's my bipolar diagnosis. Ever since my diagnosis, I've been a really big advocate of talking about mental health, and, you know, as challenging as something like this may be, I do feel it's important to talk about these things, because if people are constantly afraid to discuss these issues, you know, those that really do need the help, they will be far too afraid to actually seek that attention and seek the attention of, medical professionals such as therapists or psychiatrists. And I think making content like this normalizes the issue. I think making content like this helps reduce the stigma a bit and makes it a bit more acceptable for things like this to be discussed. This channel never really had a long-term vision, but that's most recently changed, and this channel will be a place where I do talk a lot about mental health, a lot about my experiences with bipolar, what it's been like living with it, and all I want to say, or one thing I really want to stress, is that while living with bipolar is not an easy thing, it's possible. And I'm really glad for my diagnosis and for the doctor that helped me, because he genuinely changed my life, I would have to say, for the better. He's given me a lot of hope when it comes to the type of medical care that is available out there, and there is hope. There is hope. In fact, after I got out of, after I moved away from Staten Island, after I left that job and I left that relationship, and I was able to reach some sort of stability, I actually got this tattoo that says hope. And I grew up loving punk rock, and I was like so adamant about getting this on my knuckles, but I had 0 tattoos during the time, and the tattoo artist looked at me and she was like, "It would be incredibly irresponsible of me to give you a knuckle tattoo knowing you have no other tattoos. It could affect your ability to get a job in the future." She's like, "I can't live with myself doing that." So she suggested I get it somewhere else, and she had a good reputation. It's important to do your research when it comes to tattoo artists, and at that point I was just like, "Oh, I really want a tattoo." I was like, "Okay, well, where should I get it then?" And that was the spot that she suggested. I've sometimes thought to myself, like, "Oh, I really hope someone doesn't look at this and think that, like, because it's here that, like, I used to do heroin." Because that was never my drug of choice. I have never done that shit, ever. I think having hope is really important, and I think it is worth noting that hope is very different than faith. Hope is, when you very much want to believe something will turn out for the better, but there is no certainty. When you have faith, there's like a foundation there. When you have faith, it's like hope, but with conviction. And I would say having hope is really important, because hope will get you to faith, and hope can be enough to just help you hang in there and help you overcome some of the most trying times. So that's my bipolar diagnosis story. If you believe that you or someone that you know has bipolar, I highly, highly recommend that it is something that you look into and that you address. Remember that it's really important to be mindful, whether it's with yourself or someone else. Mental health can be a very touchy subject. A lot of people can be very defensive. Not everyone is ready to get help. Some will never acknowledge that they need it. And there are people like that in my life. There are people like that in my life that have issues that I know could live an unbelievably different existence had they chosen to look into it and to medicate it, but they choose not to. It's very difficult to sit there and watch someone's life go by, and seeing people go through these extremes. It's sad, because if you care for someone, you wish things were better for them. Knowledge is power when it comes to mental health, and even though there is so much information out there, I do want to emphasize that what you read on the internet cannot substitute the knowledge of a trained medical professional, and it's worth considering. to see an actual doctor because a condition like this requires that. So that's all that I have for you guys today. Thank you for tuning in. When I got a little bit teary, I never expected that, but I guess there is a first time for everything, as they say. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in seeing more mental health related content, do hit that subscribe button and I'll have more content for you guys real soon. All right, bye.